classically, rhetoric in the ancient Greek philosophy of rhetoric was broken down into three main groups. And this is a really important concept. And this is something that we're going to be coming back to a lot. And rhetoric is talking about how you can form different arguments. And this is coming from back when people would come and discuss things at the Greek Forum. And rhetoric had three main forms of argumentation. The first one was ethos. And ethos is who you are and how your experience matters when you're forming an argument. And so if you're if you're playing basketball and your mom is just really proud of you and like, wow, you have a really good outside shot, you're going to be like, oh, thanks, mom. Of course your mom likes what you're doing. However, if Michael Jordan comes up to you and is like, wow, I saw you playing and your outside shot's really great, you're going to be like, whoa, Michael Jordan thinks I have a good outside shot? Wow, that's incredible. And so ethos is like, even though it's the same exact words, who's saying those words matters a lot. And so it's an argument from experience. And so if you're talking about, something like war that's very experiential, you might want to get the perspective of somebody who went to war and talked to a soldier, not an academic. And so the second form of argumentation is pathos. And pathos is your passion. And specifically in rhetoric, that's how you command the form. And I think because the Greeks were talking about rhetoric, they talk about pathos, and that's a little bit limiting. And in reality, pathos is really expanded upon into what I call medios. And medios is really just your command of the form. Are you good at cinema? Are you good at guitar? Are you good at whatever is that medium of exchange that you're operating on? It's what's your passion and your way that you manipulate the medium and how good you are at that. And so you might have a lot of experience in something, but when you actually go and do it, you're not that great. So even if you've been dancing for 10 years and you're a professional dancer, you might not be as good as someone who has a really strong command of dance and that's only been dancing for a year or two. And so there's all sorts of ways how medios and pathos really inform your argumentation. And then the last and final one is logos. And logos is the most difficult because it's logic. Is your story telling a cohesive narrative? And logos, it's formed with a very specific type of language. It's A plus B equals C. And it's saying, hey, look, we have these symbols and we can all agree to them. And once you understand the base parts of it, the conclusions are almost mandatory. And so logos is the hardest to perform, but it also has the unique trait of being like, you can disagree with logos from like, I don't like the conclusions that this logical argument is making, but even if you disagree with it, it's still true. And so logos has a command to it that's kind of violent. It's just kind of like, it's mathematical, it's cold. But when you do use logos effectively, it can be extremely effective to certain audiences. Now, when you really take a step back, though, I think people naturally prefer ethos and pathos. And so even though someone might have an extremely compelling argument in logos, if that disagrees extremely with somebody's experience, then they're going to be very slow to adopt the argument of logos. And so there's an interesting phenomenon that ethos and logos can kind of coincide hand in hand and really argue against each other and both be true while being in disagreement. And so these argumentations and this way of arguing and this way of looking at rhetoric is really important because when people are talking about lived experience, they're arguing from ethos. And when people are talking about like an economic model or some sort of like logical theory, they're arguing from logos. And so sometimes a model might be different than the experience. And we have to be really careful that we're not confusing the map for the territory. And that's a very classic saying that is talking about the difference between logos and ethos, where the map is the logos, the logical symbolic form, and then the territory is the actual physical territory. And so when we're looking at argumentation, when we're looking about any really artistic practice, you can approach it through logos, ethos, and pathos or medios. So pathos and medios are the same thing. It's pathos/medios. And then you have ethos, which is your experience. And then you have logos, which is the logical, formal understanding of the thing. So if you were talking about, just using the war example again, if you were talking about war, generals go through war games all the time, and that would be a very logo-centric exercise. However, you're using logos in the war games to simulate war, and that's going to be very different than actually going to war. And so if you were talking about, what will be the best, military strategy, you might want to talk to actual soldiers, and then you might want to also talk to military theorists who and military historians who have studied all the past performances of war and really understand it from a more theoretical level. And so a lot of this is tapping into the discussion between theory and practice, or theory and praxis, and it's just a really important distinction to make when we're looking at artistic forms and forms in general.